All right, this is filling up quickly. I don't know why it's taking me so long to first go onto my personal page to invite people to come to the MoAD page to then be a part of this conversation. I should have been doing this months ago. So anyway, always room for growth and learning. Happy Friday, folks. We're here. The weekend's here. Let's go. The salted table. Let's go. That's right. The weekend's here. Black History Month is upon us. Big up to Carter G. Woodson. Welcome, everyone. My name is Bryant Terry, and I am a chef and author. And I'm the chef in residence at MoAD, the Museum of the African Diaspora. You know what? Let me turn this Doom off. Y'all know me. Y'all know I'm a huge MF Doom fan. But the masked villain is kind of distracting me because I just want to be listening to his lyrics. N-T-Wizzle. Hi. Once again, my name is Bryant Terry, and I am the chef in residence at MoAD, the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. This is a position I've held since 2015. I co-created it with our former executive director, Linda Harrison, who brilliantly understood the role that this museum could play outside of fine art exhibitions. I always say that in San Francisco, R.I.P. Dune, tasted by Tosh. Yes, the masked villain. I always say that, you know, in a city such as San Francisco, with a rapidly dwindling population of Black folks, if people don't know, over the past decade or so, the outmigration of San Francisco has brought the population from around 13% to about 3%. 3%. Gentrification, tech industry, housing market, which is ridiculous here in the Bay Area, is decimating the population of Black folks. So Linda Harrison, in her brilliance, understood that the role of the museum, especially in a city such as San Francisco, holding space, helping Black folks feel seen, heard, known, and appreciated. That's what the museum is about, and that's what the spirit of this program is about, is really, you know, highlighting the brilliant contributions that we've made throughout history to Black foodways, Black food scholarship, Black cookbook writing, all that, but really looking forward and thinking about what does the future look like. And for me, this idea, you know, in the West African tradition, there's this concept, the concept of Sankofa, which means as we're moving forward, we're looking backwards to bring many of the best lessons, best practices, and whatever we need from the ancestors and our elders in order to help us more efficiently navigate what the future is. So that being said, I am going to bring in, well, first of all, let me say, big up to Elizabeth Gessel, who is the program coordinator at MoAD, my partner in crime. Thank you to Kaiser. Kaiser has been our program's underwriter since it started in 2015. They continue to support this important work that we're doing to talk about issues dealing with health, food, and farming at the museum. And I want to introduce Adrian, and then I'm going to bring him in. Adrian Miller received an AB in International Relations from Stanford University in 1991 and a JD from the Georgetown University Law Center in 1995. From 1999 to 2001, Miller served as a special assistant to President Bill Clinton with this initiative for One America, the first freestanding office in the White House to address issues of racial, religious, and ethnic reconciliation. Miller went on to serve as a senior policy analyst for Colorado Governor Bill Ritter Jr. from 2004 to 2010. He served on the board of the Southern Foodways Alliance. In June 2019, Adrian lectured in the Masters of Gastronomy program at the, I don't know Italian, but I'm going to try this, Università di Scienze Gastronomiche. I'm probably messing it up, but that's okay. I studied French. Nicknamed the Slow Food University in Pollenzo, Italy. He's currently the executive director of the Colorado Council of Churches, and as such is the first African-American and first layperson to hold that position. So, do I know Conscious Culture Publishing? They're small, they're in San Fran as well. Connect with them. Okay, Doc. I will definitely do that. Let's bring our brother Adrian Miller in.
Yeah, what's up?
What's up, Dr. Miller?
Hey, good to be with you, brother.
Good to see you. Are you home?
Yeah, I'm at home.
Oh, cool, cool. Okay. I know you don't have a PhD, but I call you Dr. Miller because you bring in that PhD level of scholarship, further building on the food canon. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I feel this way, and I think a lot of people feel like you're one of the most important independent scholars working on food issues. So thank you, my brother.
Hey, you do know how to say the right things to me. I appreciate you, man. It means a lot coming from you.
So we have a lot to discuss. So let's get into it. First of all, as someone who's worked in government, can you please help us make sense of the past 4 years, specifically between March 2020 and the current moment?
I wish I could make sense of that, man. It is just Looney Tune stuff, man. Because I worked in the house, right? And so I'm just trying to figure out how we even got to this point. And I worked on something called the Initiative for One America. And all it was about was, hey, if we can just get together, talk to each other, and listen, we might realize we have a lot more in common than what supposedly divides us. So to be at this point now where we can't even talk, there's a whole bunch of people that won't even accept facts,
Mm-hmm.
don't even want to hear something that might challenge their view.
Yeah.
Man, it's a trip. I'm just wondering where we go from here, But I think it's up to people, like you and me and others of goodwill to be love and light in this time and be a voice for peace
Mm-hmm.
and try to bring us together. But advance progress, right? Because we want justice, we want freedom, all that stuff.
Yes.
But we got to be the light.
Well, you talk about, I'm glad you mentioned I think you meant to say echo chambers, but it is something I think about often, and just the way in which social media can just, the algorithms that these tech bros create, they allow us to hear people that we believe in and we agree with, but often those kind of alternate views are becoming, they're fewer and fewer spaces where we can be in dialogue helpfully about alternate views. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts about just how this kind of new era of social media is impacting just like discourse among people who might not see this in same page or be on the same page?
Yeah, so for me, social media cuts a lot of different ways, right? And in one way, it's a beautiful connector because now really you can connect with anybody on the planet, right? But then at the same time, it's a way for people to self-select what they hear. They only gonna go to certain things they trust, quote unquote, and they just get a really distorted view of the world because they're just talking to the same people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what's important about your work is that we have fewer and fewer spaces to come together. But I think food, music, faith, sports. We still have some parts of our experience where people from all walks of life at least have the potential to come together.
Mm-hmm.
So, I tell people we need creative folks. I almost call us reconciliation entrepreneurs
Mm-hmm.
to figure out creative ways to bring us together because we're fighting against so much.
Yeah.
But I'm excited about how food can connect people because usually food disarms people and they're willing to sit down at the table, learn something about another culture. And food is an act of love. When you cook for somebody, you're saying, I care about your survival, right? Even if the food is straight nasty, you're at least saying, I care about, or you made an attempt at least.
No, I totally agree. Well, in that spirit, because you write about food, I see you traveling the country, eating at some of probably the most delicious restaurants that one can find. Do you do a lot of cooking at home, Adrian?
Oh, yeah, I got skills. Yeah. Now, I will say this. I will say this. I'm not cooking as much now because I got a little money, so I'm trying to spread it around to support all of these restaurants that are on the precipice, right?
Yeah.
So I'm doing what I can. So I'm doing way more takeout than I usually do, just to try to give restaurants some love, especially black-owned places.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mix it up by cooking at home. And usually when I cook at home, it's usually like fish and a salad. But when I like to make soul food, believe it or not, I love just a pot of greens, some black eyed peas, and some cornbread. I mean,
What else is there? That's the staples, right?
right.
So let me see. Let me say this. when does your book publish? Black Smoke, your next book?
Yeah, so my next smoke, Black Smoke, African Americans in the United States of Barbecue, drops on April 27th.
April
So,
27th.
it's not too far away. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to have you back because I definitely want to have space for you to expound more fully about that book. Look, I'll be honest, I'm coming as a fan. Like, I rushed over. I've been on set all week shooting photographs for my new book, Black Food, and I literally was like, forgot about time and rushed home from the studio in Berkeley to get here because I'm a major fan of your work, and so I'm coming from that place. But also, these conversations, they go wherever they need to go, and so
right.
But
right.
I do want to talk about the kind of origins of your interest in food scholarship because you come from government. You spent a lot of time in that space. What was the kind of moment in which you pivoted or at least decided that I'm interested in exploring these issues that have to do with food, but specifically African American foodways?
Okay, so it actually had to deal with government. So at the very end of my stint in the Clinton administration, I was at the end of his second term. And what happens when there's a change of presidential administrations, you have to write your letter of resignation to the incoming president administration. And shockingly, George W. Bush accepted my resignation, so I was out of a job. Now, at that point in my life, I wanted to be the senator of Colorado. So I was going to go back to Colorado and start my political career, but the job market was really slow. So I was watching a lot of daytime television. I'm not even going to tell you what shows. And then at some point I said, I should read something. So I went to the bookstore, found this book by John Edgerton, Southern Food at Home, on the Road in History. Page 4 of that book, he writes, "The tribute to Black achievement in American cookery has yet to be written." So the book was about 14 years old when I picked it up. So I just emailed him cold. And I said, "Mr. Edgerton, you wrote this. Do you still think this is true?" And he said, "For the most part, nobody's really taken on the full story. They've done parts of it, but nobody's done the full story. So there's room for you to do what you want to do." And so with no qualifications at all, except for eating a lot of soul food and cooking it some, that's what launched the journey.
So then I guess when I think about this important project, did you start thinking early on that, I have eyes on writing a book project that a university press could publish, or tell us more about the origins of soul food, the surprising story of an American cuisine, one plate at a time. This is one of my favorite books. But before you do that, can you just give us your definition of soul food? This has been hotly debated in many different spaces. I'm interested to know, how does Adrian Miller define soul food for the people out there?
Yeah, so just like a good coconut cake, I got some layers to it, all right? But
take us there.
The first cut is it's just one of the African heritage cuisines in the U.S. So I think Creole food, Low Country food, and Southern are a little bit different. And I say soul food combines the culinary ingredients, techniques, and traditions of West Africa, Western Europe, and the Americas. All comes together in the South, but soul food is really the food that Black migrants took out of the South and transplanted in other parts of the country. So that's why there's a lot of overlap with Southern food, but it's something different because when people go to a new place, they try to recreate home. And if you can do it with the exact same ingredients and things, you do that. But a lot of times they're going to places where they couldn't get stuff fresh. So they had to rely on canned, frozen, dried. They were interacting with new neighbors, right? Immigrants from other parts of the world. So all of these things come together. And I think one thing that people ask me about, well, what's the difference between soul and Southern? Short answer, soul food tastes better. But if you want to talk about a little bit, if you want to go in a little bit more detail, a lot of overlap with, again, technique and all that kind of stuff. But I think soul food tends to be more seasoned, tends to
like
rely more.
The big flavored meats that we might find at a soul food restaurant, right?
Right,
or big
yeah.
flavored, dishes.
Exactly. More emphasis on variety meat. Now that's breaking down because now all these fine dining chefs have discovered, pig's feet and turkey tails and all these other cuts, right? But that was a hallmark of soul food. Also, the lines between savory and sweet are blurred. So sugar and cornbread. And then and this is a variation of the spiciness, but just intensely spicy stuff like Nashville hot chicken is I mean, that makes total sense that Black people came up with Nashville hot chicken, right? Out of Prince's in Nashville. So
wait. Where do you land really quickly on the sugar versus no sugar in cornbread debate?
Oh, I'm sugar. Yeah. Oh, just a little bit. Now, you don't have to go all the way to Jiffy necessarily, but I'm not going to hate on you if you do. But seriously, almost every recipe that I've seen by African Americans, at least in the last 50 years, has had some sugar. What I argue in my book is that that was black cooks attempting to take this, yellow cornmeal outside of the South that had been milled in a different way, so it lost a lot of its natural sweetness. I think black cooks were just kind of, compensating for that. Yeah. Because when you get that freshly ground cornmeal in the South, right, it's got a sweetness to it. So I could see why putting more sugar in it would be redundant.
What's your migration story? Like, do you have people who are from the South and y'all made your way out West? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so, I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, which immediately loses me all street cred on the subject of soul food and Southern food and barbecue.
Wait, no. We got some Denver folks in here who are bigging you up, and they some of the proudest blackest folks I know. So you good.
All right. Cool. So, my mom's from Chattanooga, Tennessee. My dad's from Helena, Arkansas. And so they met in Denver, and that's where I was born and raised. So the thing that I'm so grateful to them for is that they did not reject black culture. So even though I was growing up in this lily white part of the country, I still was belonged to a black church, went there every, weekend. And they raised me on soul food. So soul food was my foundational food. My mom was a great cook, so she could make foods from other cultures, but soul food was the grounding. So that's my experience.
I'm interested, just as someone who writes, who does research, who has written a number of books. Can you talk about your process of, putting together a book? How does, and especially given that you're not just sitting in a library and digging in the archives. I know that's part of it, but a lot of it has to do with being out among the people, meeting folks, going to restaurants. Talk about your process. Talk about what excites you to put together a book like this, because you got to keep that fire going, as you know, because it could be a protracted and isolating and sometimes excruciating process. But when I see you, at least through social media, there seems to be this level of joy that you always bring to your project. So I'm just interested if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I was not an author, right? I didn't even think I would ever write a book. So I was coming to it fresh. And I reached out to a lot of black food writers at the time. I said, hey, I'm thinking about writing this book. Do you think this is doable? And they said, hey, look, there's just not a lot of information. Our cooks have not gotten recognized. This country's racist. So cobble together the best book that you could. So I just thought it was going to be a struggle to write that book. But then there was this newfangled thing called the internet. And there was a whole lot of information available on that. And so a combination of internet research, especially these companies that are digitizing old sources like newspapers and magazines. So you can read stuff from the Middle Ages. You just got to figure out how food. So it's a combination of that, going to the library. And on Denver, I have a world-class library, public library. There's also a college here, University of Denver, that had a culinary collection. This woman basically had a collection of 7,500 cookbooks. So I had those in Denver at my disposal. So I went to the library and I said, okay, let me just understand how black people talk about this food. So I read 3,500 oral histories from formerly enslaved people. And I looked for all references for food. I read thousands of newspaper articles and, digitized sources. And then I talked to people, hundreds of people, and asked them, what do you think soul food is? What was it? Where's it going? And then because I care about my research so much, I decided to eat my way through the country. So I went to 150 soul food restaurants, 35 cities, and 15 states.
Wow.
So if you're my social media friend, I brought you along for the ride because I take a picture of the restaurant's exterior and the plate of food that I was eating. So now this was back in like 2010, 2011. So back then when I was taking pictures of food, people, especially in black restaurants, there are people like, nudging each other in the kitchen, pointing at me. Finally, one woman came up to me, one server said, why are you taking pictures of your food? So, those early days. So that was the experience. And so, and then I would also just reach out. I have a good social media following. And so I just throw questions out there and people have been very good about just hitting me back and saying, you need to check out this place. This is the move. So it's really all of that coming together.
What was the reception from folks when you were going into communities, restaurants, talking to elders? Like, how are people receptive of, your project?
So it was a mix. So most people were very positive. They're like, "Oh yeah, it's about time somebody wrote this story." And why not us? Why are they celebrating all of these other foods? But no, our food is either slave food or something that needs a warning label because it's going to kill you if you eat it.
Yeah.
And so, but then there were a lot of people saying, why we've moved beyond this food. Why are you celebrating it? So it was a real mix, but overall people were positive about it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is no one had really seen a scholarly treatment of soul food that was also accessible. So it was hard for people to wrap their minds around it. And so the journey was, it was bumpy. And one thing that's kind of funny, so at that time, I was single, I was dating, right? So I just wanted to be out there saying, I pursued my dream. I'm writing about soul. I can't tell you how many women, especially sisters, are like, so you really don't have a job, do you? So.
And when you talk about the book being accessible, I joked about, you being Dr. Miller, but I think one of the that you bring, you don't come from the academy, and your books aren't mired in academic jargon, and they are accessible, and they're well researched, and the footnotes are intact. But I feel like, I gave your book to my dad, and he read it like within a week and had a lot to say about it. And I think, regular everyday folks can come to your work and feel like they can like latch onto it.
Yeah, because, one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to back up what I was saying, because I knew that I was saying things about soul food that people at least never heard before or would need some convincing. So I wanted to say, look, here's the evidence. You can draw your own conclusion, but this is what guided me to this. Because what kills me is you find these books that, they say very interesting things, some next level things, but there's no backup for it. Yeah. So you have no idea if they're just making it up. So I wanted people to see how I reached those conclusions. And also, I'm hoping that people will build on my work, and then there's maybe stuff that I got wrong, right? And then somebody down the road will say, I understand why Adrian said this or wrote this, but this is, now we have more evidence that shows this as a possible theory. So.
Yeah. What do you think about, it's something that I encounter often. I'm sure you come across this, you can kind of broached it earlier, but this way in which Black food, specifically African-American cuisine, is vilified. And it's not just the wider culture that vilifies it, but it's also our people. And I think there's these very simplistic and reductive ways in which people think about Black food. And so I'm wondering how you feel about that, and what would you say to people to help them have a more complicated understanding of the diversity and complexity of Black food?
Yeah, so I would say, especially with soul food, because there's just a diehard narrative that's existed, and I understand it. And, the narrative and the definition that people often say of soul food is like, oh, it's the food that Black people took, that white people didn't want, and we made it delicious, right? That's an empowering narrative in some sense, and it's also negative because it plays into this idea that, oh, you want the stuff that white people don't want? And so I'm asking people to take another look and understand the complexity, that it's bringing together the three continents. It's a story of resiliency and ingenuity, and then ultimately triumph. And so I'm getting people to understand that. And then I'm also trying to reimagine soul food as a migrant cuisine. Because one of the things I hate to see is like, oh, Black people are getting killed by soul food. Yeah. And these articles, and they pop up in Black press too. And I'm like, okay, where's the accounting for systemic racism, environmental, and then also, they're only looking at one aspect of the cuisine, the celebratory aspects. If you listen to what nutritionists are telling us to eat, and this is your wheelhouse, right? More dark leafy greens, more sweet potato, okra is a superfood, hibiscus. These are all the building blocks of our food. So it's a matter of how that food is prepared. And I'm trying to get people to understand the glorious stuff had its place in our cuisine, but it wasn't something that was commonplace. Right. If you go back to and look at what enslaved people were eating, it's very close to what we call vegan today. If there was meat, it was not an entree, right? It was just used to season vegetables.
Bring some flavors out,
Yep. It was only on the weekends or and special occasions when the work schedule slowed that people did that glorious cooking like fried chicken, barbecue, and all of those things. And so the way I reimagine the migrant story is like, if you look at any immigrant group in this country, what we think of as their typical food is usually the celebration food of the old country, right? Especially in restaurants, because when you're a restaurateur, you want to show off the very best of your culture, right? So you may have some everyday stuff on the menu, but you want to show off all that great stuff. That's what soul food is. It's the celebration food of the South. The thing is that we're eating it out of context because we're having it on the regular when it was meant to be eaten every once in a while.
Exactly. And, I think it frustrates me the way in which people kind of paint the South as a monolith, or even painting the institution of slavery as this monolithic institution. As you know, it might look different in the kind of Black Belt as it does on the coastal Carolinas, as it does in Louisiana, as it does in the Caribbean. And then that might mean a number of things in terms of autonomy, to grow your own food, to, hunt, to supplement, protein and things like this. So, I just feel like people need to, and I'll tell you what frustrates me the most. I'm not going to say any names, but there's some big name celebrities that have been kind of pissing me off because they are still playing into these narratives around like soul food. Like I had to give up soul food in order to be more healthful, but not, it's just the wrong talking points, I feel like, to be putting out there. And so, I don't know, we need to send them to you to give some, you need some, help these brothers, give them some talking points. I mean, people, I'm not going to call anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, you make a really provocative point because, again, I did not understand the complexity of even the slave regime. So, when people think about slavery, they're thinking about the big plantations, all of that. That was maybe 40% of it. Most enslaved people were on small farms or in urban areas. So believe it or not, slaveholder and enslaved were eating out of the same pot. So that complicates that whole story that soul food is just this negative thing made especially for Black people. And so if we step back and look at all the contributions that African Americans have made to not only Southern cuisine, but American cuisine, I mean, we were all up in the kitchens 100 years ago, like we see Latinos now, right? I was at a Jewish deli a week ago. Everybody in the kitchen was Latino, but the food was on point, right? I was like, okay, this looks legit to me. So that we were as African Americans, we were those people, those type of cooks in the White House, on trains, restaurants. And so we are foundational, so much so that I think maybe even our imprint is not even really appreciated. It's almost like the touch that we've had on popular music, speech, fashion, all that stuff. TikTok. It's so ingrained now that people think of it as just American. Yeah.
I said TikTok jokingly because, are you on TikTok?
No, man, I can't choreograph a dance. That's the only reason.
You got to get on TikTok, Adrian. I'm telling you, like TikTok, I think a lot of people imagine it as just like Generation Z folks doing dances, but there's it's like the world. There's so many different subcultures on there, and I'm trying to get people who are doing work in food to move over there because I just think Stephen Satterfield said this the other day about like the way in which he feels like when he's looking on Instagram, so many of his friends are brands. And I think that it does kind of facilitate that type of presentation of one's identity. Whereas with TikTok, I just think because it's this nascent kind of social media form, it gives people the opportunity to reinvent themselves and just be a little more just real. And so I feel like your voice on there, doing some really like pithy videos where you just like dropping facts, you get a big following. So.
Okay. I'll look into it. Thanks for the tip. Thanks for the tip. No, seriously, I thought I had to get a dance down. So
now, I mean, if you do a dance, you will probably get like an exponentially more number of hits, but you don't have to.
All right, cool.
So, Adrian's food displays are already a TikTok. Okay, Black culinary, that's Therese Nelson.
Oh yeah. She told me that I should just have my own TikTok channel of just my box. I'm known for opening up those styrofoam boxes and showing what I'm about to eat. So,
but see, that's the thing. You could just do that. Like, I don't even think it has to be kind of like this heady and intellectual presentation of the work. It could just be like, your thing is, I'm going to soul food restaurants and just showing you this bomb ass food that I'm eating and just leave it at that. So anyway, we can talk about that later.
Okay.
This book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet. I'd love to know more. I mean, I have some thoughts and ideas about why you'd be drawn to a subject like this, but can you tell us more about, why this book?
Yeah, so that started out of my soul food research. So, and, I feel so goofy about this because I was working in the White House. If I just thought about this while I was in the White House, I could have gotten so much scoop, but, of course, it came later. But so I was researching the soul food book, and then I came across about 3 or 4 stories of these African Americans who cooked for our presidents. And it wasn't enough to anchor a book because it was sketches, right? And I just said, okay, when I finish the soul food book, I am going to see how much information I can find out about these cooks. And then, a few years later, I had identified 150 African Americans, and every president has had an African American cooking for them in some capacity. So it was really great to tell their stories. And so instead of applauding administration by administration treatment, I decided to write about categories of cooks. So I gave an overview of kind of what presidential food is like. And then I talked about, we call them chief ushers today, but I talked about the stewards. And they were in charge of running the entire residence. So they would hire people, do the shopping, menu planning, all of that stuff. You know, for the most part, those were black men for much of the 19th century. And then if you actually look historically, if you just took all of the White House kitchen staff and put them in one room, the typical person would be an African American woman. And it's really only since the Kennedy administration that the black influence in the White House kitchen has waned. But you know, a lot of presidents brought their enslaved cooks or just private cooks that worked for them to the White House to just make sure they got great food. And, you know, when you look back on it, like, it makes a ton of sense because we had so many slaveholding presidents. But also African Americans were, it was really like French chefs or black cooks were the standards for cooking. So when people thought about American cooking in the 1800s and early 1900s, they thought black people making their food, their cooking.
Why that shift with the Kennedy administration? I would expect, given his liberal-esque kind of leanings, that tradition would continue.
Yeah, so it was really because Jacqueline Kennedy, and I don't think this is a race thing. It's just that Jacqueline Kennedy wanted elevated food. So she wanted food from classically trained French chefs. So even though that's in our history, the chef that could have been chef of Thomas Jefferson was James Hemings. Sally Hemings, one of her older brothers, Jefferson had him trained as a French chef for 3 years, but he didn't end up working in the White House. But at that time, in the 60s, very few African Americans in the kitchen had that experience. So as they either left or retired, then these classically trained white chefs took their places. So we went from dominating the kitchen to only having a few in the kitchen at a time. Now, the place where you do see still a lot of African Americans is in the White House mess. That's not a political statement. That's just the military term for a kitchen. And so the West Wing has its own kind of dining space. It's like a private club for senior officials. That's called the White House mess. The U.S. Navy actually staffs the culinary team there. So you have a lot of African Americans from the U.S. Navy who are working in the White House in that space. Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot more emphasis on barbecue, the contributions of African Americans, really, you know, illuminating the work that we've done and kind of pushing back against the erasure of Black folks in that space. I'm wondering, how do you feel about, like, I mean, you got like these Emmy nominated shows on Netflix, and people are like getting really excited about not just barbecue, but Black folks who have been part of this tradition. Can you talk about just how you feel about seeing this?
It's very heartwarming because I got to tell you, the reason I wrote Black Smoke is because I'm just tired of white dudes getting all the credit when it comes to barbecue. And, you know, I think the standard diversity critique of something is that, hey, y'all have never given love to people of color. But that was not the case in barbecue. In fact, for 200 years, African Americans were the standard bearers for excellent barbecue. And that happened all the way up into the 80s. It really wasn't until the 90s that you started to see a shift where storytelling regarding barbecue started focusing on basically 4 types of white dudes. So the Bubbas, you know, dudes you would see on like Duck Dynasty, Dukes of Hazzard, Moonshiners. You know, they're all really the same kind of dude. And there are plenty of Black folks living in rural areas. You never see them profiled, right? But anyway, then you've got the hipsters, right? The dudes with interesting facial hair, interesting glasses, tattoos. Then you got the fine dining chefs.
Austin, Texas. Sorry.
Yeah. And then you got the fine dining chefs, right? Who are in barbecue in a way they've never been before. And then you've got dudes that are a combination of them, right? They're fine dining chef, but they put out a hipster vibe or a Bubba vibe. And so you'd see the storytelling happening where they're the ones focused. Fast forward, I'm watching these shows on the Food Network and other, you know, Discovery, and it's just like white dude after white dude after white dude. And I think the thing that really killed me is there's a Barbecue Hall of Fame in Kansas City, the American Royal, which had when I looked at it, they had 33 inductees, only 1 African American.
I remember you writing about that. I was like, yeah.
So Yeah, but to their credit, they invited me on the board, and I'm happy to say that we've had two diverse classes the 2 years that I've been in the mix, including Desiree Robinson of Cozy Corner Restaurant in Memphis, so the first African American woman in there. There's a whole bunch of people that need to be in there, but there's a process, right? But we're making progress. But it's cool to see more recent shows having African Americans. I could think of I think it was Netflix, the American Barbecue Showdown. Kevin Bludso, a barbecuer out of Texas, who has a place in LA, slamming, by the way. You can get his food on Goldbelly. He was the host. There was another woman I didn't know the other host, but then you had Sylvie Curry, who's probably the most recognized African American woman on the barbecue circuit, and she's profiled in my book. I'm not going to give it away. She's in that competition, and I think people will be very happy to see her food. So, we're making progress, but still, compared to the number of African Americans barbecuing, the representation is nowhere near what it needs to be.
Yeah. So obviously there are a lot of debates regionally about who has the most slamming barbecue in the South. Now, I'm gonna just put it out there. I'm from Memphis, so please don't offend. But from your travels, like which location geographically is putting out the barbecue that you feel like is just most delicious and compelling?
Yeah, so my top two are basically Kansas City first, and that's a function of growing up in Denver. That was the strongest influence. But then Memphis is second. Now, I'm a rib guy, and in Memphis, man, Cozy Corner, Payne's, like that chopped pork. Ooh, that chopped pork sandwich at Payne's with the mustard slaw on it. Neely's, like the barbecue bologna sandwich there. I mean, yeah, Memphis it's just a slamming spot. So those are my favorite. Now, I have to admit, Texas is gaining some traction on me. So like Central, but when people talk about Texas barbecue, again, this is endemic to the problem. They go immediately to Central Texas. They don't talk about East Texas, heavily African American. In Houston, I mean, Houston's a serious eating town, and they've got bomb barbecue there. So, in my book, I highlight those areas as well. So, we need to expand what we call Texas barbecue.
For sure. Let me tell you something. So, full disclosure, everyone, Adrian Miller is contributing to my next book, Black Food, a collection of recipes, art, and essays. And I invited Adrian to compose an essay about cookouts. And let me tell you something, Adrian. When I read your essay, it was put the kids to bed, wife's reading by me, I'm in the bed reading on my laptop, and every 3 sentences, what? Like mind exploding. Seriously, like this history was revelatory. I had no idea. Can you just break it down? Just give us it don't even have to be a synopsis. You can spend the next 20 minutes talking about this fascinating history of cookouts. Please break it down for us. For them, because I already know.
Yeah, so the first thing so the first thing is we got to distinguish a cookout from a barbecue. So barbecue, we think of involving a lot more time. Yeah. Cookout, the cookout thing is just the beauty of it. I think is the fact that it's so informal, right? You just call up. I'll be like, hey chef, man, what you doing? I got some food on the grill, man. Go roll on over. Come over whenever. Bring whichever you want. And then you're hanging out. You're playing some bones, busting some spades. But the interesting thing is, like, throughout the African American experience in this country, there was always wariness about Black people getting together, no matter what the context. And so the cookout was a response kind of to these grand, formal, public barbecue events, right? It was our way of, getting into the niches of society, or, finding that spot where we could just do our thing. And the funny thing is, there were a lot of locations that actually tried to make cookouts illegal. Because what happened at a lot of these informal barbecues is people started planning forms of resistance. Some of the most high-profile rebellions by enslaved people were planned at barbecues.
Tell us
so
about
they tried to
tell us about the biggest one.
Oh man, you got Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Prosser, Gabriel Prosser. I mean, all of those ones in early Virginia history, and some of them were almost successful, right? But the common thread was that barbecues were a way, and we have to step back and just understand that despite the horrors of slavery and other things, there were ways that African American people could find leisure time.
Yeah.
And socialize. And it wasn't, pervasive, but there's still these opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's how our community formed. And barbecue and cookouts are great because just the nature of that food, it demands community, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to serve a lot of people, and you bring people together.
Yeah.
And so it was just cool to see kind of these two narratives in barbecue emerge: the big spectacle barbecues, but then people doing things on their own terms as the cookout. So it was good to see that. And then fast forward to what happened in the park when that family was just grilling, and that woman, it kind of rejuvenated those themes of surveillance, white wariness, escalating things when they didn't have to be.
Yep.
And so the community response to that, and I know that was muted because of COVID this year, but the community response to that at Merritt Lake, I just thought was beautiful.
Yeah, big up to Black folks in Oakland reclaiming Lake Merritt as public space that we need to be seen at, for sure.
Yeah.
So, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, because I don't know if you touched on this, but because initially the role of Black folks in these kind of grand barbecues was actually as primarily the labor, and it was white people who were enjoying. Can you talk a little bit about just that piece?
Yeah. So, a lot of the early accounts that we get of barbecue is definitely an enslaved, Black labor force. So, because barbecue was very time consumer and very labor intensive, because basically somebody had to find this area, they had to clear the area, clear the brush, get all of the debris and stuff. Then somebody had to dig a trench. And depending on how many animals were going to be cooked, that trench could be really long. Then somebody had to chop that wood, that hardwood, put it in the trench, and then set it on fire, burn it down to coals. Then other people had to get the animals, and they were usually pigs, sheep, or cows. And then they had to butcher them, process them, stick poles in them so they could be flipped repeatedly. So you got a separate fire to refresh the fire in the trench. And so somebody had to keep flipping that stuff and adding the sauce, which was pretty much vinegar with red pepper flakes, to build that flavor and keep stuff from burning. And then after all of that was done, then you had Black people actually serving the whites who assembled. And usually there were whites watching this because they were just it was a spectacle, right? Yeah. They just couldn't believe what they were seeing. So part of it was watching this all in progress. And then African Americans would serve them. And then only after whites finished, and then even after the meal, African Americans entertained them. So they would sing, plantation melodies, spirituals, all this kind of stuff. And then only then, after all of that, did African Americans get to eat. So it was a Black experience from the beginning to the end. And this kind of stuff happened well into the 20th century. I mean, I found a story from Vogue magazine in the 1940s where in Texas, basically, there was a group of white people that, as an experience, you could go out to a plantation, have a plantation barbecue, and then there was this cooked by Black people, and then afterwards, a Black group of singers would sing spirituals. So, I said it just reminded them that it's a Black world after all, because and it was all part of that entertainment. And so we see it live on, like Gone with the Wind. There's a barbecue scene, and they actually got an old expert African-American barbecuer to consult on how they should do the barbecue scene and Gone with the Wind. And so, and it plays out in barbecue culture, restaurant culture around the country. I mean, places like Beverly Hills had barbecue restaurants featuring plantation themes. And so Blackness and excellence and barbecue were wedded together. Now, there was a side of racism often, but that just permeated well beyond the South. Because what we find is that people outside the South were very happy to peddle on these racist stereotypes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't just a Southern thing.
Was there a barbecue scene in Birth of a Nation?
Well, okay, so this is tragic, but I'm glad you brought that up. So what I didn't know before doing this is that lynchings where an African American was burned, they called those Negro barbecues.
What? I didn't know that.
Yes. And so that is a tragic part of the history that I didn't know. So I bring that to light in my book. And they were just nonchalant about it. And so you had the term Negro barbecue applied to two things. One is to these lynchings, but then it applied to any gathering of Black folks where they were barbecuing and, you know, just minding their own business. And so in each case, it was a response to white fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you even had cases of white interlopers going to Negro barbecues, quote unquote, and starting mess. And then they would say, "Oh, see, those black people are so violent."
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times these barbecues were a way to assert political power,
Yep.
especially during the Reconstruction era.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just really fascinating, man. There was a lot of stuff I just didn't even know.
Black Smoke coming in April. I can't wait to devour that. And you know, I want to do something. I want to do, like, we got to figure out a cool interactive event. I see you've been doing a lot of work with our brother Howard Connors. You're doing an upcoming event, right? What are you guys going to be talking about? When is that?
Yeah, so that's coming up on February 9th. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about the history of African-American contributions to barbecue. So it's going to be Howard Conyers. If you guys don't know him, he's a NASA rocket scientist who's a whole hog enthusiast. He's from South Carolina. And so he's going to be there. And then Ed Mitchell, who I feature in my book. I talk about Howard in my book as well. Mm-hmm. But Ed Mitchell, who's an expert on North Carolina barbecue, he's going to be part of the panel. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we're just going to try to give the real story. And just, you know, unfortunately these days we have to make the case for why African-American contributions to barbecue should be recognized. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's going to be a celebration.
Yeah. Someone asked in the audience, why did you choose UNC Press to publish your books?
So the short answer is
Black Smoke as well?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
So the short answer is nobody else would publish the book. So that was the case with all of my books. I had an agent that shopped them around. And in each case, I was just told, some variation, I was told, oh, this is interesting, but we just don't think it fits our catalog, or we don't think anybody's going to read this. Mm-hmm. Some people told me, you know, not in these words, but they said basically, you don't have any game. Mm-hmm. I remember that happened when I was
mostly coming from like trade press.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm. I get no love from commercial publishers. Mm-hmm. And you know, just some real talk. There are plenty of African Americans in positions of power that passed on my stuff as well. So mm-hmm. This is some real talk. So I'm going to say something petty. But when I was peddling when I was shopping the soul food book, you know, this white editor, she's just like, yeah, you know, come back to me in a few years when you've got more of a reputation. I'm like, bump that. I'm writing this book now. And so how happy was I when I won the James Beard Award for Outstanding Scholarship and Reference, and she was in the audience. I know that's petty, but I'm just telling you that felt really good.
Yeah.
And so, so it's been a real struggle. So I'm just very grateful that UNC Press took a chance on somebody who's not an academic and let me write the books the way I wanted to, because they could have insisted on just rigid, you know, academic storytelling, right? But no, they said, write the book the way you want to. So they've allowed me to have an accessible voice. And a lot of people really appreciate that. They're like, I think they expect it to be really dry and boring. And they're like, oh man, you're really funny. Mm-hmm. I'd never expected that. I was like, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you're a brilliant writer. I have to say, and I don't know, like, I feel like you know, I know it's my new book, but I feel like that essay is top of your game. Like you're firing
thanks, man. I appreciate that.
So,
yeah.
Listen, Dr. Miller, I don't want to keep you any longer. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll definitely be in touch about circling back to further discuss the things we need to discuss. Something fun that we typically do in these sessions is we end with the kind of quick fire round. Basically, I'm just going to throw some words out, and then you just tell me what's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay. All right. I'm ready.
You ready? All right. Great Migration.
Chicago.
Bill Clinton.
Woo, I almost said the wrong thing. Let's just say smooth.
Pork butt.
Oh, I think barbecue.
Denver, Colorado.
Home.
Cicely Tyson.
Legend. And then I think about that last scene in Miss Jane Pittman with the spitting in the cup. Ooh, I'm never going to forget that scene.
For real. Look, I ain't gonna try to clown too much, but I will say one of the few good things that Tyler Perry has done for us is continue to employ and highlight Miss Cicely Tyson in his film. So we got to see her in her glorious elder years.
Yeah.
Adrian Miller, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you all for joining. I feel like, we have these conversations and then we'll put them on Facebook and YouTube. And so we get like a whole other round of people who come to it later. This has been one of the most, like in terms of people just coming here, this has been one of the most popular conversations we had. So thank you for your brilliance. I could sit at your feet and listen to you talk about these things for days. And I look forward to being in conversation and hosting you at the museum. And when we open back, well, we're opening, but when we can have some sense of a normalized world, I want to have you here, and we're going to not only do something that's heady and intellectual at the museum, but we're going to go to the community, and I want to do something that's about bringing people together, sitting at the table and grubbing. So let's try to make that happen.
All right, that sounds great. So good to be with you. Thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate you.
All right. Everybody, thank you for joining. Kaiser, thank you again for underwriting this program. Y'all have a good weekend, and RIP MF Dim. Peace. I'm gonna stop this thing.